Test, 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 test. Is it good? Okay. Do 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 do. Test, 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 test. This is a test, a test, a test, 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 test. Is that okay? Can you hear me now? Okay.
y'all listening? There's emails going around asking for money from members of the officers of the club. Please disregard them. That's not me. I'm an officer, but yeah. Somebody's trying to test you. What's going on? What's going on across the club across the United States? Not just our club, but them club. Again. No, please just disregard. All right. So.
However, you can respond to the ones that I
Don't confuse them. No problem. Yeah. We'll never ask you for money.
Test, 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 test. Okay, cool. Well, my name is Steve Pritchard. I don't remember how many times I've been to your club. 3 times, I think, before this, but twice, maybe. I don't. Maybe more. They all start to blur together. It's a pleasure to be here. We're going to do a fairly simple project today. Actually, I guess I better step back a ways. For anybody that's new and hasn't been here when I've demoed before, a little background. I grew up in a little town in South Dakota. My first lathe experience was when I was about 10. When I was too young to drive a tractor at that point, my dad had an old shopsmith. He used it as a drill press and a table saw, never used it for anything else. And my little brother and I, when we got bored, would cut a 2x4 in half and make the thing into a lathe and use carpenter's chisels to turn it round. I have no idea how I found out what a lathe was, how to use a lathe. We were using carpenter's chisels, so I guess I didn't learn much about how to use a lathe. But I don't think my dad ever knew that we did that because we never got in trouble for it. But so that was my first adventure with the lathe. And then you have to fast forward for about 45 years until I was figuring out what I was going to do in retirement, and I thought I wanted to build furniture. I'm glad I didn't go that way because I don't have the patience, I don't think, to do a lot of the furniture making, but span theater of woodworking, and that fits me pretty good. I started wood turning in 2000. I retired in 07 and he couldn't call me full-time, but I've spent as much time as I can in my shop ever since. I'm almost 80, and that as much time as I can is getting to be less and less and less all the time. But so anyway, that's kind of where I come from. Most of what I did during the middle years from about 2010 to 2020 was craft shows in Alabama and Georgia. I kind of became Mr. Peppermill at a couple of those. I've lost count of how many peppermills I've made. I don't even want to know, I don't think. And then I got into cremation urns, and today that's pretty much what I make. I've recently decided that I'm done horsing those big trees around, and I've always told my wife that those segmented people don't have enough to do. That's why they do segmenting, and if she wanted a piece of that, she was going to have to find one of those people to buy one from. Last summer when it was 95 degrees and about the same humidity, and I'm horsing trees around that are this big around, I came home and I said, Linda, those 3/4 inch boards are looking awful good. So a lot of what I'm doing now is segmented work, and they're a lot lighter for sure. So today we're going to do a really simple project. I call it a shorebird. You can call it a crane or a heron or whatever you want to call it. But pardon me, a critter works too. I forgot where I was. It involves spindle work, but it also involves some off-center work, some off-axis work, a little bit of turn and air or interrupted cutting, whatever you want to call it. So it's got a lot of things involved in this one little bird that, particularly for people who have got some experience with the lathe but want to try some new things, this is a good thing to start with. And there's a couple more back there on the show and tell table if you want to look at them. Okay. So I've found the center of this piece of wood. We're just going to make it round here in a minute. And then we will start some of the off-axis stuff. That ought to be pretty close, but it's not. There we go. Okay. Can you hear me? Does that work? Okay. So we're going to use a spindle roughing gouge to turn this round. Why am I turning it round?
What kind of wood?
Hard maple. If anybody's got anything to do with Mark Soleil, he was selling these rounds, I don't know, for $1 or $2 a piece, and that's where this came from. There we go. First of all, I'll talk about the woodturner's dance. If you're unfamiliar with the woodturner's dance, the only reason I can do it is I don't have to move my feet. That was supposed to be a joke, by the way. Address the lathe straight on, feet straight, about shoulder width, parallel to the ways. Tool held against your hip, elbow against your other side, and grab the tool with your hand, and then from then on, wherever your body goes, that's where the tool goes. And it also allows you to be a left-handed wood turner really easy. Most people I come across say, I can't do anything with this hand except hold something while this hand is busy doing something else. You can be a left-handed wood turner because all you do is put it against this hip, put your other hand against your side, and now wherever your backside goes, that's where the tool goes. Your butt doesn't know its left hand from its right. So wherever it goes, it doesn't care whether you're left or right-handed. And it makes it real convenient, for example, in making this round. If I want to start over here towards this end, right-handed, you've got to get to an uncomfortable position in order to move the tool like you want it to. But if you work left-handed, you can just, whoops. It is going the right way. Okay. I thought it was going backwards for a minute. And so all I'm doing is moving from one foot to the other, and I'm able to make a very, very accurate cut and a very smooth cut. I'm turning off the lathe like I'm supposed to before I move my tool rest. If you want to hear the lathe joke, if you sharpen your tool rest, it just becomes another tool. And that way you can move your tool rest anywhere you want to, and if you shove it up against the wood, all you do is just peel off wood. That's a joke. So I'm doing exactly the opposite that I was doing before, but I'm doing it right-handed now. And there's no difference. 2334 RPM. I learned on a 3520A, and it does not have a speed readout, so I don't pay much attention to the speed of the lathe other than safety-wise. If it bothers me, I don't turn it up that high. That's about as far as I go. So we've got it round. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to work. That's what my grandmother used to do to chickens when it was time to harvest chickens. We're going to work on this neck first, and as you can see, if I hold this straight up, the neck is not straight up. Now you can do a bird by just offsetting everything the same amount, and this neck will then be straight up. I don't think it looks very natural that way. That's not the way birds stand. I can't say this is a very natural bird, but I try to make it as natural as I can. So what we're going to do is do this part first. So we're going to orient it that way in the lathe, do the top part of the bird, and then we will put the thing back in the chuck and do the on-center rest of it. First thing we need to do is put a tenon on this thing so we can hold on to it. There's a variety of ways you can do this. The way I'm going to do it is use a skew. Take off the little fuzzies at the corner. I use chucks that have straight jaws. This works essentially the same for all jaws, but particularly with the straight jawed chucks like the one-ways that I use. If you don't make sure that this end of your piece is true, if it's going back and forth like that, when you grab that with a chuck, you will grab more wood, let's say, with this side than this side, and when you tighten that chuck down, it will want to pull that piece of wood out of alignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, first of all, that I've got a straight tenon, and then I'm going to use the point of the skew just to make sure that it doesn't take much. There's like 1/8 of an inch or less here that is true. And that's all that matters, because that's the only part of that tenon that I'm going to grab a hold of. And I do that first because that's the last time I'm going to have an opportunity to put that tenon on there. Because once I've got that off-center neck done, I can't get this thing back on the lathe to put a tenon there to grab later on. So if you start with about a 7.5 or 8 inch blank, that will give you enough wood to make a bird, and then give you enough room down here to get in under the foot to make it concave and make a decent finish on it. So we're going to leave the lathe at the center, at the headstock end, and we're going to put it off center at the tailstock. So what we've got is on center here, as pretty much as far off center as I can get. The thing that I need to pay attention to here is twofold. First of all, I want the grain, where's the camera? It's hard to see, but the grain on this bird goes across his back here. It looks a little funny if the grain is running off axis with the way the bird is facing. So this kind of looks like, you know, feather patterns or whatnot that you might see on the back of a bird. So what I've done is I have put, here's the side grain up here. I've tried to put in fact I missed it some. I've tried to put the tailstock. So here's side grain, and here's side grain, I'm going to get that grain pattern across the back of my bird. The larger piece of wood you get, the more you can lean that neck forward. Does that make sense? Because we've got more distance here that we can move this piece of wood. Happens to be what we've got here, but if you want to use a bigger piece of wood, you can make him lean forward more. The further you make him lean forward, the bigger this bottom needs to be, or he's going to have a tendency to fall on his nose. If there was ever a reason to turn the lathe 360 degrees before you turn it on, this is it. With the cup centers, fortunately, more than likely all that's going to happen is just it's going to stop and everything is going to spin, and you turn the lathe off and tighten it up and away you go again. If you've got something like a steb center in here, it's just going to dig into your wood, and you're going to lose more and more wood down here as you do that over and over. Okay, so
Doing this at the same speed.
probably not. The question was, am I doing this at the same speed as I made it round? Unlikely. I'm going to turn it up to what feels right, but I'm pretty sure 2300 is not it. I'm thinking that 900 is about it. We're a little past the shape. This is a bowl gouge. It's a 3/8" bowl gouge. It's a Sorby. I've tried a lot of bowl gouges. I end up with this one in my hand for some reason. Even though I've got other brands, this is just the one I like. So when you're turning off center, I think you can probably see, yeah, you can see the shadow here. Even though it doesn't look like the wood is clear out to my tool rest, I know that it's within about 1/8 or 3/16 of my tool rest. So I'm not going to stick my tool in there rapidly to try and find that edge. One of the ways to find that edge without too much risk is just to let the bevel find it. Now I'm not cutting at all, so all I've got to do is change the angle of my tool and I can start to cut. I've got a hold of my tool and I'm using my index finger against my tool rest as a depth gauge. And that way, hopefully, I won't stick the tool in there too hard, or too far, I guess I should say. If you haven't done interrupted cuts before, I'm getting too deep a cut and that's what's happening to me, but if you haven't done interrupted cuts before, the thing that you have to make sure of is you control the depth of the cut and where the tool is. You no longer are riding a bevel like down on the inside of a bowl. You can't depend on the wood to hold the depth of cut for you. You are in the driver's seat 100%. And the more wood I take off, the faster I can make this thing turn and not have as much chance of it coming out of the lathe. I do appreciate the bravery of the guys in the front row. Or maybe that's the misplaced confidence in me that you've got. And this just becomes a repetitive cut here. Cut slowly. Cut off the end of the wood and not onto the end of the wood. If I were to cut from my right to my left, if I took too deep a cut, I could take a big chunk off the side of this wood. It wouldn't probably matter in this particular case because I'm going to cut it away anyway. But it's a good habit to get into. Yes, sir.
Can you explain why you're using a bull gouge versus a spindle gouge for that operation?
The bowl gouge is a heavier gouge, and I'm going to be going quite a ways over the tool rest. I could have, I don't think I have one, but I could buy a heavier spindle gouge. People get hung up on bowl gouge and spindle gouge. The wood doesn't care if the metal is sharp. The wood doesn't care what you're using. Now, a spindle gouge is easier to get into the grooves between two beads and things like that. So there's some advantages to using one versus the other depending on your situation. But for making something like this round over the tool rest, you could use either. You could use a spindle roughing gouge if you wanted to. Spindle roughing gouge tends to take a larger cut just because it's got a larger edge length. And it's just that much easier to take too much of a cut and stop the work and have to tighten up your work and whatnot. But you can use that easily, just the same as I'm using the bowl gouge. Did that answer your question? I'm pretty sure that was asked for somebody else, actually, but. So we're up at about 1,000. There's 1,100. The other thing that using a bowl gouge does for you is, generally speaking, if I was using a spindle gouge, the way spindle gouges are traditionally ground, I would probably have to have my tool swung more towards the headstock using a more oblique angle to the wood. This way I can approach it a little bit more comfortably. Just to show it can be done. Changes the angle of my tool to the wood. That's less comfortable. I reground this thing before I left, and I put too steep a grind on it. And that's why it's giving me issues. So somewhere in here, I'm going to have to decide where I want the body, this part of the body, to occur. You can make these little buggers short neck, long neck, any way you want to. This seems to be what I come out with, so that it seems like the body from here to here is about a third, or half rather, of this, kind of the rule of thirds. There's no effort to get that to be strictly a third and 2/3, but that's what seems to me to look the best. What I'm doing now is getting rid of wood in a just a little different way, and what I'm doing is I'm holding down firmly on the tool rest and just rotating the tool through the wood, trying to get down to the diameter that I want. And like anything that you turn in spindle work, you don't want to get this whole thing down to something thin, because you'll get a lot of vibration. I'm going to get some vibration anyway, some flexing, but I'm going to try to stay away from it as much as I can. I don't remember which joke my wife said that I was supposed to stay away from today. What'd she say, all of them? Yeah, I'm sure she does. I think I already avoided it, but I'm not sure. So I can tell this one. Whenever I'm out demoing, first of all, whenever you're turning, you want to make sure you take your rings off. But when I'm out demoing, I always put my ring on my keychain, because if I lose my ring, I'm not going to need these anyway. Right? And she can probably tell it better than I can now. It had to do with my dad finding out about us using his shopsmith. I still have my backside, so I know he didn't know we did it. And the guys that have seen me several times have heard that several times too. Okay. One of the things you have to be careful of is you have to make sure that when you set this up, that you leave enough meat up here at the end of this piece that's solid wood, that you don't run out of wood and have to make a design choice. And this goes for any kind of turning that you do. If you're getting bouncing on your tool, if your tool is really bouncing around and you're having trouble controlling it, the more weight that you put, the more force that you put on the tool rest with your hand, the less it's going to bounce. You didn't see me do that. And it's easier to put that force on the tool rest in an overhand manner. Yes, sir.
What do you mean by overhand manner?
Okay, the question is, what do I mean in an overhand manner? I mean that I have my hand over the tool so that I can hold down on it, as opposed to an underhand, I guess, manner. You're welcome. So now I'm looking at the diameter of the neck that I want. And that turns out to be roughly 3/8 of an inch, little less. Like most birds, I want this thing to slowly get larger as I work my way down the length of the neck. So now we're at about 1,500. And as you can probably see on the camera, there is a shadow here. Right now, my diameter is about like that, but there's about 1/4 of an inch of shadow on both sides, so that means That's how far I am from solid wood. Kind of give me some idea of when I can start writing the bevel. And you can see I'm still using the woodturner's dance when I make these tool movements. I may not have addressed the lathe straight on, but I'm still using my body to guide the edge of the tool. Once I get down into solid wood, it's a lot easier to guide the tool. I'm not sure what you're talking about. When I'm doing this, yeah. When I'm doing this, yes, gives me a little bit more fine control. Me anyway. Your mileage may differ. Sometimes it's just more what's comfortable at the moment as far as the overhand or the underhand. I'm getting close to where I want the length of the neck. This is just a shear scrape, kind of a shear cut, kind of a shear scrape. Straighten out a few of my tool marks. I'm going to have a t-shirt made for myself, I think, that said that'll sand out. I think that's a good wood turning tool term. There's a couple ways to attach the head to the body with these things. If you're pretty good at getting things to match, it's best just to not put a tenon on the end of this, just have the neck go into the hole on the head. This one has a tenon. If you make a tenon, you can see a little bit of a gap here where there's a curve in the head. Truly, if you're selling these or giving them to somebody, I would bet that out of 100 people you gave one of these to and you said, was there a gap between the body and the head? Not one of them would notice it. So you can do it either way you want. I'm going to make a tenon on mine. I have a drill bit here that I'm going to use to drill the head. And I'm going to use my calipers to determine what size hole I want. I'm going to use these calipers to size this tenon. And what I've done is I've rounded the end. You know, when you buy a set of calipers, they're practically needle sharp on the end. Those don't work well with a turning piece of wood, do they? those of you that have tried it anyway. So these have been rounded so that they tend at least not to catch. My preferred method for rounding the tips. Last time I did that was just recently on these, and I just used the grinder. Just, nah, I just used the grinder. But sandpaper, any way you can do it. File, you name it. As long as they're smoothish, it wouldn't hurt to run a piece of sandpaper over to make sure they were smooth. The thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to loosen up my my jaws here, and I'm going to move, come on. I'm going to make that gap just a little bit wider. And what that's going to do for me is, as I am cutting down into this wood and I've got these jaws checking my diameter for me, there's going to be a small, hopefully, but measurable time between when these drop through and when I get my tool off the wood, right? We cannot react quick enough to get no gap there. So what happens is I will overcut, I will undersize that tenon because it drops through and I take my tool away, but in that long I have made that tenon smaller than what these things dropped around. So I've made it slightly larger, and then if I need to go back and touch it up a little bit, I can. Now's the best time to do that, because the further and further I go down this bird, the more vibration and whatnot I'll get, and it's just better to do it now. I've got a thin parting tool. This one, a student at John C. Campbell made for me, so I can't tell you where I bought it. I'm going to start by just getting rid of as much wood as I can here to get the most wood I can for my my neck. So I'm going to hold it like this. I'm going to hold it away from me. I'm going to stay out of the line of fire so that if it does catch, it's going to try and throw it at me, and I'd rather have it throw it past me than at my face. My face isn't worth much, but it's the only one I got. Where are we? There we go. I'm going to start cutting slowly. Okay, so they've fallen through. And I would rather have this just a little bit large, just in case. I don't want to go too small on it. I can always use some sandpaper to make it a little bit smaller if I misjudged. Let's see, can we sand in here? Okay. Pardon me? Okay, I'm not going to sand that much. It has been a while since I've needed that much sand dust collection. And I'm going to turn it quite a ways down. It's always good to sand slower, but this is slower than I would normally sand, but this way it won't kick up dust. A good way to get something, if you've got an undulation in the size of like a 10-inch thing like I'm making here, a good way to get that flat is just to wrap the paper around it, and in wrapping that paper around it, it will make this surface in here pretty well flat, and it will sand off the high spots, and you can sand down to the low spots. Does that make sense to everybody? This is 120. It's about where I start with about anything. When I first started out, that was not where I started, I can tell you that. When Nick Cook calls it shaping paper, I was an expert. Okay, so I want to go just a little bit longer with that neck. Speaking of sanding, how many of you do vessels? Okay. Are all the vessels you do round? Are they round when you get done? Most of the time? Okay. If they're not, do you turn them around? Do you put them back on the lathe and turn them around? In doing cremation urns, I learned a long time ago that they do not have to be round, because all they have to be is symmetrical when you look at them from any angle. Because I look at it this side and it's symmetrical. If I walk over here, I don't really remember what it looked like from over here, and it can be significantly different in this axis, and people will see it as round. When I was doing classes at John C. Campbell, I would hand a piece around that was not round, and when I got the thing back, I asked how many people saw anything different about it. Oh no, it's beautiful, blah blah blah, the normal stuff you get. And I'd say, no, it's not round, feel it again. And they'd all go like this with it, and they go, that thing's not even close. It's off topic with this, but just remember that it does not have to be round in order for people to think it is. They see what they think they're supposed to see. Something to remember, the further that you get, probably most people in here use a bowl gouge with the handle down. It isn't level like this, right? Does everybody turn it with it down here like this? Okay. So the further, if I'm cutting here and the wood is getting further and further and further from my tool rest, what's happening to the tip of that tool? It's moving higher and higher on my work, isn't it? So the further you get over the tool rest, if you want to maintain cutting on center and the same angle that you're holding the tool, you've got to continually lower that tool rest. Does that make sense? Is there a question on that? Okay. That's something that a lot of people don't realize, and they end up, and I do the same thing. I end up out here like this, and I should have rearranged my geometry here so that I could continue to cut in the way that I'm most comfortable with it. And that's why I just adjusted my tool rest. So now I'm starting to work on the angled back, and I'm going to blend it into the neck. And you can hear we're starting to get a lot of flex in the wood. Oops, don't do that. And now is when you have to start kind of taking a look at what you've got. So when we turn this back on center again, I'm going to turn this part away because that's not very natural looking for a bird. I've got a reasonably angled back on him. I'm going to take one more cut. So you might want to move apart here. I had hoped to do that all in one cut, but I didn't get my stance right. Okay, I've got a little bit less, fewer tool marks there, but I think that'll sand out. I've got an interruption in the curve right there I'm going to get rid of, and then I lied, that wasn't my last cut. This one is the last cut. Maybe. Always be aware of where the end of your tool is. I just now almost stuck it back in where it shouldn't have been. And it's a good idea to finish any sanding that you're going to do right now, because you're not going to get a chance to come back to this very shortly. Yeah, I should have taken a couple more cuts. Oh, what got me off on the urns was now I don't remember. It'll come back to me. I'll call you all about 4 tonight or tomorrow morning. That's annoying. I don't remember what I was going to say, and it was important too. Do your normal, random orbit, whatever you want to call it here. I'm just going to do 120, and we're going to call that good. I would go to 400. It's still got a little bit of a problem there, but okay. So we've got our tenon up here. We've got the neck looking modestly good. And I think it's time to put it in a chuck. Does that look like a bird yet? Probably not, huh? Knockout bar. Got it. I saw somebody do one similar on YouTube. Looked like a fun little project. There's some good stuff out there. There's some not so good stuff out there. A guy by the name of Bill Dean down in the Atlanta area. Bill sold his shop at around 90, and he was still making earns. But what got me into it was, you hear so many people say, well, I'd like to make a living doing wood turning, but I can't make a living. There's just not enough money out there. And Bill said, here, hold my beer. And he made $70,000 the first year selling urns wholesale to funeral homes. It is probably, if not the only one of the few ways in wood turning that you can actually make a living. I wholesale them for almost $400. When I was making a bunch of them, I could make them in about 3 hours. So I was averaging $130 an hour at the lathe. And that counted finishing everything but going and getting the wood, which is certainly time consuming. But maple, walnut, hickory, sweet gum, pecan.
Did you process it yourself?
Yes. The question was, did I process it myself? Yes. In fact, I've gotten into segmenting, and that's one of the reasons I'm getting into segmenting is that I am no longer able to horse those 2.5, 3 foot trees around and haul 50, 60-pound blocks of wood around in and out of my truck and all that stuff. I came home one day after 95 degrees and 95% humidity, and I sat down and said to Linda, those 3/4 inch boards are looking pretty good. And so now I'm making them segmented and out of all kinds of wood. Let's see, where are we? We can do a demo one day. I don't know if did I do this cremation urns for you guys? Cremation urns, did I ever do them for you? Yeah. Okay. Now, it would have been a while, yep.
You make them segmented?
I've made one so far segmented, yeah. I've only made 5 pieces, I think, something like that. No, segmented. That's all I've made ever. Yeah. It helps to have 25 years of wood turning experience behind you, though, when you start making this stuff. Tim will probably get after me for this, but you know, there's so little wood turning actually in segmenting. It's kind of hard to call yourself a wood turner anymore. it's more of a planner and an assembler. Yes. What were we talking at lunch? A master of gluology. Let's see. I had a pencil here somewhere. Segmenting is, I'll let you look up for yourself, but it in a nutshell, it is cutting boards, usually 3/4-ish or less, into segments. In other words, trapezoids that can be glued together in a ring, sanded flat, glued one on the other into a shape. Yeah, there you go. And if you're back there and look close at that, you'll be able to see the seams between the wood segments that he used to put that together. Yes. Yep. Not near as much as it used to. There's calculators. I use a sled that a guy did. His name's Pete Markin out of Louisiana somewhere, as I recall. You can look them up. They're called wedgie sleds, but they've got 2 boards attached to a sled, and you use those to cut the angles, and you just go back and forth. His are so accurate, they're done on a CNC machine. He's got a tight-fitting dowel that goes into each one of those, where if you want to make 12 segments, you line it up with a 12-segment line, put that dowel in there, and that sucker is at 15 degrees, period. Point nothing. I have had 0 of them, except one that somehow I screwed up, come out other than perfect. And that's where all the math came in, was figuring out how long those segments had to be, a bunch of things like that. There's a program online called Woodturner Pro that will print out a spreadsheet for you and tell you that that segment needs to be 1.613 inches long. The 1.3 really doesn't much matter. Yeah, yeah. It exactly. Yep. Yeah. If you're interested in it, yeah, take a class like that. It'll jumpstart you a long ways ahead of where you could have been. So, yep. Yep. One of the reasons that I didn't get into segmenting earlier was I looked at it in the early 2000s, and there was a lot of math. And people were building half rings and having to sand them flat so that they would, the last two segments, the joints would be flat, and just ways around the inaccuracies of the time. And now things are so accurate that most of that just goes away. Oh, yes. All woodturners have flat space problems. We aren't flat wood workers, but we need flat spaces. Okay, so the main thing I need to do now is to make sure that this does not contact my tool rest, and you don't need to ask me how I know. Anything I do, now I've got to remember that this thing is out here flying around. I'm going to mark my work here. If my pencil will work, there we go. Okay, so that just gives me an idea of where his butt, so to speak, comes down. So, and I'm also going to start up here. So this whole thing is not going to be this diameter when I get done, but I'm going to blend this neck into his body as I cut around the breast of the bird. I'm going to get rid of a little bit of wood. This is just a peeling cut, just to get rid of some of this material. Now I can see, and I don't know if you can see on, it's not easy to see on the TV, but I can see the shadow of where that front part of his neck blended out into the body. So I'm going to reach in there just a little ways. And cut some of that away. And I haven't got it all yet, but I'm pretty close, and I try to get kind of an idea of how far up I can go on the bird. One more cut. I try to bring his neck down and blend into the body, but it comes back out just a little bit. Many birds, it's my belly, but their breast, it kind of comes out a little bit before it comes back in again. And I'm just trying to not minimize that, but reduce it to something that looks reasonably anatomical. All right, that ought to do it. Another tip, if you, like I was cutting across here and I was cutting into an area where there was no wood, you're obviously putting some pressure on the tool to cut through that wood. And if you're just removing material, one of the ways you can keep from, when you come out of the wood and you're pressing on it, you make this lunge. Happen to anybody? Is to, if you're turning, you're using the woodturner's dance, just kind of rotate the tool with your body instead of push on it. And if you rotate it, then when it rotates out, nothing happens. No lunge, no catch in here where you went too far. Nothing like that. Same thing there, just rotate out. Rotate it across the wood. So what I'm going to try to do is basically make half of a bead here. So I'm just going to drive this tool around in an arc. Get more wood out of the way. Try to continue my arc. If it helps, just stand back from the lathe and look at your piece. You can really tell a lot better whether this is a continuous arc, if that's what you're looking for. We were talking about urns a little bit ago. If anybody is interested in getting into urns, you're welcome to stick around afterwards, and I'll be glad to tell you what I know about them. Or you can take one of my cards, and I'm willing to talk about urns anytime you want to. I can tell you that you'll spend more time in funeral homes than you ever thought you were ever going to, or hoped you were going to spend. This is a really good time not to move your tool rest while the piece is moving. And I suspect that you could turn this lathe fast enough where that neck would come off. It would flex enough to come off. That has not happened to me yet. This is a Doug Thompson, he calls it a detail gouge. For the life of me, I can't figure out why. But the difference between it and a regular spindle gouge is this flute is not as deep, and therefore you've got more material between the bottom of that flute and the bottom of the rod that it's made from. A detail gouge, to me, would allow me to get into tight spaces. A regular spindle gouge, in my opinion, will get into deeper, deeper crevices than this one will. What this ought to be called is a long and strong spindle gouge, because you can get way further over the tool rest with this gouge than you can with a traditional standard spindle gouge. And that's why I like it for things like this, because I'm a good 1.5 inches over the tool rest here. And without having some special tool rest or something, that's pretty much, I'm stuck with what I've got there. Sure. Does anybody not alter the grind? That's a smart-ass answer, I'm sorry. But I did, yes. I grind everything the same way. My bowl gouges have the same angle that my spindle gouges do. Everything is set on the Wolverine the same for all of them. There are people who have a different grind for every tool that they're on, and if that works for them, more power to them. I just like the consistency. I do have a couple that are ground swept back so I can get into little places, but yeah. 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 You're welcome. Just for you. Got to make you feel special somehow. Okay. Very light cuts because there's not a lot of material being are holding this thing up at the moment. And I'm going to make this leg about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. If you're turning beads, this is a little off subject, but I'm going to turn more or less a bead down here because birds have knees, right? So we're going to put knees on this, a knee on this bird. But if you're having trouble doing beads, put a shorter handle on your spindle gouge. Because even if you have to stand back here, you can now do this whole movement without your body, near as much of your body anyway, getting in the way. In fact, I think it's John Lucas. He just turns a ball on the end of his, so all he's got is like a teardrop at the end of this, and he's rolling beads with just essentially the tool itself. Nothing special about what I'm doing here other than just putting a little kind of sort of bead on in the middle of this. I guess you'd call it a tenon. Try to get it as crisp in here as I can. And this is where being able to turn left or right-handed comes in really handy, because you can get into places that are very difficult to get into if you're limited to one hand or the other. Trying to build kind of a little stand for him. One part of getting old, my hands didn't used to cramp up the way they do. And I can't say that I like that. Okay. So we have to decide how big a base we want on this bird. You can make it smaller than this diameter that the neck is going around on, but to be safe, if you've got a base that is only slightly smaller or sticks out slightly less than the neck does, you're in pretty good shape. I think this one is a little bit big. So we'll see if we can't make it too small. That looks about right. Down here. Yes.
Are we getting near the airport?
Yes. If you want to have your meeting, I can sand this and we'll be ready to go whenever you're done, or your show and tell rather. If you want to do it that way. If you want to do show and tell, we're about halfway. And I can get this sanded up and not take everybody's time watching me sand. If you don't mind me sanding while you talk. Okay. Oh, that's right. You don't care if I interrupt them, do you?